The wind under the Chicago L tracks didn't just bite, it chewed. At 15 degrees below zero, tears freeze before they hit your cheek, so I didn't cry. I sat on my backpack and counted my net worth, $150. 30 minutes ago I was blowing out candles. 29 minutes ago my stepmother Melissa locked the front door of the brownstone, laughing as she shouted through the wood. Happy 18th, Megan. The $1.7 million belongs to the family now. You're officially obsolete. I didn't scream. I didn't pound on the door. I put my cash in my sock and started walking. Have you ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you? Drop a yes in the comments and let me know where you're watching from tonight. Let's see how many survivors are here with us. I found a maintenance alcove behind a concrete pillar that smelled of rusted iron and frozen urine. It wasn't shelter. It was just a break from the wind. I curled up on a discarded shipping pallet, pulling my knees to my chest to conserve heat. The trains roared overhead every 12 minutes, shaking the dust from the ceiling into my hair. But the noise wasn't the problem. The silence in my head was the problem. Specifically the silence of my father Christopher. 30 minutes ago, when Melissa screamed that I was a parasite and threw my coat into the snow, my father hadn't said a word. He hadn't looked at me. He hadn't looked at her. He had studied the grain of the hardwood floor like it was the most fascinating thing in the universe. For years I had told myself he was a victim. I told myself he was beaten down, henpecked, afraid of Melissa's rage. I told myself he wanted to protect me but couldn't. Shivering in the dark, I finally let that lie die. My father wasn't a hostage, he was a volunteer. It is called the trap of the enabler. Psychologists talk about learned helplessness, where an animal stops trying to escape pain because it believes it has no control. But my father had control. He had a job. He had a voice. He had a daughter. He simply chose not to use any of them because the cost of fighting Melissa was higher than the cost of sacrificing me. He had made a transaction. He traded his morality for a quiet evening. He traded his daughter's safety for a comfortable bed, and a wife who wouldn't yell at him if he just obeyed. He wasn't innocent because he didn't throw me out. He was the one who unlocked the door so she could do it. Melissa was the weapon, but Christopher was the hand that aimed it. I realized then that the bystander is just as guilty as the abuser, maybe more so. The abuser acts on impulse or malice. The bystander acts on calculation. My father calculated that my life was less valuable than his conflict-free existence. The cold seeped through my jeans, turning my skin numb. I rubbed my arms, not for warmth but to feel the friction, to feel real. I stopped hoping he would come looking for me. I stopped imagining his truck pulling up to the curb. He wasn't coming. He was probably sitting at the dinner table right now, eating the roast Melissa made, nodding along to her justifications, telling himself he did the best he could. I closed my eyes. The girl who wanted her daddy to save her died in that hallway. The woman sitting under the train tracks didn't need a savior. She needed a strategy. I didn't hate Christopher anymore. Hate implies passion. Hate implies you still care what they think. I felt something colder than the Chicago wind. I felt indifference. He had made his choice to be a spectator in his own life. Fine. I would make sure he had a front row seat to the consequences. The pile of blankets 10 feet away shifted. I tensed, grabbing a rusted length of rebar I had found near the tracks. In this part of the city, movement in the shadows usually meant danger, but the figure that emerged wasn't a threat. It was Susan. I had walked past her spot on the corner of State and Lake every day for 6 months on my way to art classes. Every day I gave her $6. Not 5. Not 10. 6. It was the exact price of a hot coffee and a bagel at the cart nearby. It was a transaction I made with the universe, a small tax I paid to keep my own luck from running out. Apparently my luck had run out anyway, but the investment was about to pay a dividend I never expected. Susan didn't look like a beggar tonight. She stood up straight, shedding the hunch she wore for the pedestrians. She walked over to me, her boots crunching on the frozen gravel, and sat down on the pallet opposite mine. She didn't offer comfort. She offered intelligence. "You think they are done with you?" she said. Her voice was scratchy like sandpaper on concrete but clear. "You think because they locked the door the transaction is closed? It isn't." I looked at her confused. "They have the house. They have the money. What else do they want?" "They want the loose end cut," Susan said. "I used to be a legal secretary, Megan. I know how trusts work, and I know your stepmother. I saw the car circling the block 3 times last week. Black sedan, tinted windows. They weren't looking for parking. They were looking for witnesses." She leaned forward, her eyes sharp in the gloom. You think you were paying me for coffee, kid. You were paying for security. You were paying for eyes on the street. I have been watching them watch you, and I know the look of a family that is cleaning up a balance sheet. This was the invisible ledger. The world thinks charity is a one-way street. You give, they take. But that is amateur thinking. Real interactions build equity. For 6 months, I didn't just hand Susan cash. I looked her in the eye. I treated her like a stakeholder in the human race when everyone else treated her like a glitch in the scenery. I had invested in her dignity. Now she was liquidating that asset to save my life. She reached into her coat and pulled out a crumpled flyer for a discount electronics store. Go there. Buy a burner phone with a high-resolution camera. Pay cash. Do not turn it on until you are back here. Why, I asked. Because tonight your stepbrother Tyler is coming back, she said. I heard him on the phone outside the station. He wasn't talking about evicted tenants. He was talking about ventilation. He was talking about accidents. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature hit me. Ventilation, the maintenance room. We are going to set a trap, Susan said. We are going to live stream it to a cloud server I still have access to. We aren't going to fight them, Megan. We are going to audit them. We are going to let them document their own crime. I stood up. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, humming focus. I took my cash out of my sock. I wasn't a homeless girl anymore. I was a CEO conducting a hostile takeover of my own survival. I'll be back in 20 minutes, I said. Susan nodded and pulled her coat tighter. Keep the receipt. We might need it for evidence. I positioned myself in the crawl space above the utility shed 30 yards down the track. It was a vantage point Susan had pointed out, invisible from the ground but with a direct line of sight to the maintenance alcove where I had been sleeping. The burner phone was propped against a frozen rivet, the camera lens trained on the alcove door. I watched the screen. The connection was grainy, buffering every few seconds, but the image was clear enough. At 2:14 in the morning, my stepbrother Tyler arrived. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a college student on winter break, wearing a pristine North Face parka and expensive hiking boots that had never seen a trail. He didn't carry a weapon. He carried a toolkit and a roll of heavy-duty duct tape. He looked around once, scanning the shadows, but he didn't look up. He entered the alcove. On the screen, I watched him move with a terrifying casual efficiency. He didn't trash my belongings. He didn't kick my sleeping bag. Instead, he went straight to the rusty propane heater Susan and I had scavenged earlier that day. It was an old unit, dangerous if not vented properly. Tyler took a wrench from his pocket. He didn't fix it. He twisted the regulator valve until it sat at a chaotic angle, bypassing the safety shutoff. Then he moved to the ventilation grate near the ceiling. He pulled a bundle of rags from his pockets and stuffed them deep into the shaft, blocking the airflow. Finally, he taped the gaps around the door frame from the inside, leaving only a small flap loose for his exit. I watched him work, my breath misting in the dark. It wasn't vandalism. It was engineering. He was turning the room into a gas chamber. Carbon monoxide is odorless, colorless, and silent. He wasn't trying to scare me away. He was trying to put me to sleep permanently. He pulled out his phone. The audio on the live stream crackled, picking up the high frequencies of the train tracks, but his voice cut through. It is done, he said. He laughed, a short, nervous sound. Yeah, Mom. I blocked the intake and rigged the pilot. If she lights it tonight, the CO levels will be fatal in 40 minutes. It will look like a tragic accident. Just another homeless kid trying to stay warm who made a mistake. He listened for a moment, nodding. No, Dad is asleep. He took the sleeping pills you gave him. He won't know a thing until the police call. I stared at the pixelated image of his face. This was the boy I had grown up with. We had shared a bathroom. We had eaten cereal at the same kitchen counter. Now he was calculating the cubic footage of my death. He stepped out, sealing the last piece of tape, and walked away into the snow, whistling. I hit stop on the recording. The file uploaded to the cloud instantly. I sat there in the freezing dark, staring at the upload progress bar. 90%, 100%. Fear evaporated. Sadness vanished. There was only a cold, hard clarity left. They weren't just greedy relatives. They weren't just toxic. They were executioners, and by trying to bury me, they had just handed me the shovel. I waited 10 minutes to ensure he was gone, then climbed down. I didn't go back to the alcove. I went to Susan, who was waiting by the 24-hour diner down the block. Did you get it? She asked. I held up the phone. Every frame, I said. Including the confession. Susan looked at the screen, her expression grim. Then we are done playing defense, Megan. It is time to go on the offensive. Call the police. But call the specific number I gave you. We aren't reporting a suspicion. We are reporting a homicide in progress. The 19th Precinct station house smelled of stale coffee and industrial floor wax. I sat in a plastic chair in an interview room that felt more like a closet, my hands wrapped around a paper cup of lukewarm water. Susan sat next to me, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning the room like she was cross-examining the furniture. Detective Miller entered, looking tired but focused. He placed a laptop on the table. "We have your stepbrother in custody," he said. We picked him up 3 blocks from the scene. He still had the wrench and the roll of duct tape in his jacket pocket. "He is claiming he was just trying to fix the heater, that he was trying to help you." I didn't blink. "Play the video," I said. Miller opened the file I had uploaded. Tyler's voice filled the small room, bragging about the rigged pilot light, laughing about the fatal carbon monoxide levels. The detective's face hardened as he listened to the confession. When it ended, he closed the laptop. "That changes things," he said. "That is attempted murder. We are upgrading the charges. We have a unit heading to your father's house now, to pick up your stepmother." I nodded. "Good. But there is something else." Miller looked at me. "What else?" "Melissa will try to claim the trust fund is invalid," I said. "She will try to freeze the assets. She will claim I am mentally unstable or a criminal to tie up the money in probate for years. I know her. She doesn't care about jail as much as she cares about losing that $1.7 million. Susan leaned forward. "That is why we are here, Detective. We need a police escort to the office of the family attorney, Mr. Henderson. There is a document that needs to be read into the record immediately, a document Melissa doesn't know exists." Miller raised an eyebrow. "What document?" "The dead man's switch," Susan said. 2 hours later, we were in a conference room at Henderson and Associates. The atmosphere was thick with tension. My father, Christopher, sat at the far end of the table looking like a man who had just woken up from a coma to find his house on fire. Melissa wasn't there in person. She was on a video link from a holding cell at the precinct, her face pale and furious, flanked by a court-appointed lawyer. Mr. Henderson, a gray-haired man who had been my grandfather's attorney for 30 years, sat at the head of the table. He looked at me then, at Susan. "I understand there has been a development," he said. Susan stood up. She pulled a folded, yellowed document from her coat pocket. It wasn't a napkin or a scrap of paper. It was a notarized affidavit stamped and sealed 5 years ago. "My name is Susan Miller," she said, her voice clear and authoritative. 5 years ago I was the notary public for this firm. I witnessed the final codicil to the trust of Arthur Barnes. I was fired the next day because Melissa threatened to ruin my reputation if I didn't help her hide it. But I kept a copy. And I kept the original safe in a deposit box Mr. Barnes paid for in cash. Melissa screamed through the monitor. "She's a liar. She is a homeless junkie." Susan ignored her. She slid the document to Mr. Henderson. "Read the poison pill clause," she said. Henderson put on his glasses. He read silently for a moment, his eyebrows shooting up, then he cleared his throat. "Clause 4, Section B," he read aloud. "The self-executing integrity clause. In the event that any family member attempts to coerce, harm, defraud, or otherwise impede the primary beneficiary, Megan, from accessing her full inheritance, the trust shall immediately and irrevocably dissolve." The room went silent. "Dissolve," Christopher whispered. Henderson continued reading. "Upon activation of this clause, 100% of the trust's assets shall be liquidated and donated to the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. No portion shall revert to the family line. The beneficiary, Megan, shall receive a separate protected stipend of $200,000 for education and housing, but the bulk of the estate, the $1.5 million, is gone." Melissa stopped screaming. She stared at the camera, her mouth open. "You mean," she stammered, "you mean if we had just left her alone?" "If you had left her alone," Henderson said, looking over his glasses, "she would have received the money. You could have asked her for help. She might have given it. But because you tried to kill her, you triggered the clause. You didn't just lose the money, Melissa. You gave it to the very people you despise." I looked at the screen. Melissa's greed hadn't just been a sin. It had been a tactical error. She had murdered her own golden goose. The poison pill wasn't just a legal trick. It was my grandfather's final judgment. He knew them. He knew exactly what they were capable of. And he had turned their own avarice into the weapon that destroyed them. It is done, Henderson said, closing the folder. The transfer has already been initiated. I looked at my father. He was weeping his head in his hands. Megan, he sobbed, we didn't know, we just wanted. You wanted the money more than you wanted a daughter, I said. The video feed flickered and died, cutting off Melissa's screaming mid-syllable. The silence that rushed back into the conference room was heavy, suffocating. It left only my father, Christopher, sitting in the wreckage of his life. He looked small. The man who used to terrorize me with a look, who enabled a monster because it was easier than being a father, was now just a man in a cheap suit realizing he had bet everything on the wrong horse. He stood up, his legs shaking. He reached a hand out across the mahogany table, palm up, begging. Megan, please, he choked out. You have to understand. She made me. She said it was the only way to keep the house. I never wanted you hurt. I looked at his hand. It was the same hand that had locked the deadbolt on my 18th birthday. It was the same hand that had turned up the volume on the television when I cried in my room as a child. You didn't want me hurt, I said, my voice flat. You just didn't care if I died as long as you didn't have to watch. He flinched like I had slapped him. That isn't true. You are my daughter. We are family. We can fix this. You have the stipend, $200,000. We can start over. I can leave her. We can be a family again. I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was dry and sharp. You aren't leaving her because you found a conscience, Christopher. You are leaving her because she is broke and going to prison. You are a parasite looking for a new host. And I am not applying for the job. I stood up. The leather chair creaked. It was the only sound in the room. I gathered my coat, a new thick down parka I had bought an hour ago. It was warm. It was armor. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. I will handle the final paperwork with the police and the charities, Megan. You are free to go. I turned to the door. Megan, wait. My father scrambled around the table, blocking my path. Tears were streaming down his face, now hot and pathetic. You can't just leave me here. I have nothing. She took the house. She took the savings. I will be on the street. You know what that is like. You can't do that to me. I looked him in the eye. For the first time in my life, I didn't see a parent. I saw a stranger. I do know what it is, like I said. I know exactly what it is like to stand in the cold with nothing but the clothes on your back. I know what it is like to beg for help and get silence. You watched me freeze, Dad. You sat in your warm kitchen and ate dinner while I slept on a pallet under a train. You watched me die a little bit every day for years. I stepped around him. He didn't try to stop me. He knew deep down that he had lost the right to touch me a long time ago. Now, I said, not looking back, I am going to watch you leave. I walked out of the office and into the hallway. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I pressed the button for the elevator and watched the numbers count down. The doors opened and I stepped inside. As they closed, I saw him one last time, slumped against the wall, weeping into his hands. It didn't make me sad. It didn't make me happy. It just felt like a transaction that had finally mercifully cleared. The wind off Lake Michigan was still brutal, a physical force that rattled the street signs and stung exposed skin, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel it. I was wearing the new down parka I had bought with the first installment of my education stipend. It was thick, waterproof, and expensive. It was the kind of coat my stepmother would have worn while telling me to put on an extra sweater. Now it was mine. I stood on the sidewalk outside the law firm and watched the city move. People rushed past, heads down, fighting the cold. Somewhere in this city, my father was learning what it meant to have zero assets and burned bridges. Somewhere in a holding cell, Melissa was realizing that her greed had cost her the very lifestyle she had tried to kill for. Tyler was in custody, facing a future defined by iron bars instead of fraternity parties. I didn't feel triumph. Triumph implies a game was played. This wasn't a game, it was a correction. The ledger was finally balanced. Susan stepped out of the building behind me. She looked different. The grime of the street was gone, scrubbed away by a hot shower in a hotel room I had booked for her. She was wearing a wool coat and sturdy boots, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She didn't look like a victim of the system anymore. She looked like what she was, a sharp, capable legal secretary who had survived a war. We walked together toward the L station, but we didn't go up to the platform. We walked underneath to the maintenance alcove where I had almost died. The police tape was gone. The snow had covered the tire tracks of the police cruisers. It was just a dark, dirty hole in the wall again. I looked at the vent Tyler had sealed. It was open now. The propane heater was gone, tagged as evidence. They asked me what I wanted to name the new wing, Susan said, her voice steady over the roar of a passing train. The trust liquidation had moved fast. $1.5 million had been wired to the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless that morning. It was enough to build a new intake center, a facility specifically designed to help women and teenagers get off the street before the cold killed them. It was the legacy my grandfather had intended, even if he had hoped it wouldn't be necessary. I looked at Susan. She had the job offer letter in her pocket. Administrator of the new wing. A salary, benefits, a purpose. Name it the Arthur Barnes Center, I said. Let his name stand for protection since his son's name stands for nothing. Susan nodded. She reached out and squeezed my gloved hand. It was the same grip she had used that first night, the grip that had pulled me out of the abyss. You know, she said, looking at the empty alcove. You paid a high price for that coat, Megan. I pulled the collar up, shielding my face from the wind. I didn't pay for it with money, Susan. I paid for it with the illusion of family, and honestly, it was a bargain. We turned away from the tracks and walked toward the train station entrance. I had a studio apartment to furnish. I had art classes to register for. I had a life to build brick by brick with no one to thank but myself and the stranger who had saved me. I wasn't an heiress. I wasn't a victim. I was just warm. If you believe that true family is about loyalty, not blood, hit that like button. And if you're fighting your own battle right now, share this story. You never know who needs to see it to keep going.